Bernie Sanders has officially launched his 2020 campaign for the Democratic nomination. There's so much I have to say about this, it's hard to find a place to start. As I'm sure many of you in my audience are aware, Bernie Sanders ran an incredible, historic campaign in the 2016 presidential primaries and overperformed everyone's expectations. No doubt his biggest achievement of the primaries was the extremely well-organized grassroots ground game that his team was able to put together. That grassroots organizing led him to win, and I believe 48% of the votes in the primary. More importantly, after the election, that network of die-hard Bernie Sanders supporters did not disband. In fact, it grew into something that was much larger than a presidential campaign volunteer network. Our revolution went on to recruit many average working-class progressives to run for office in local, state, and federal elections. Ever since the 2016 elections, they have helped hundreds of progressive candidates win their primaries and their elections. Some of the high-level staffers in his campaign went on to fund the Justice Democrats organization, which also had huge gains, especially for their first election cycle. Some of the more prominent members of that organization are Representative Ro Khanna and newly elected Congresswoman representing Queens and part of the Bronx, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was recruited by Justice Democrats. So now, unlike in 2016, you have these kind of independent groups who will very likely be working as an arm of the Sanders campaign, while making sure progressives who aren't taking any corporate PAC money, who are running for Congress, win their primaries, which is as important, if not more important, than Bernie Sanders winning his primary. I think this needs to be stated up front and from the start. If he wasn't already, Bernie Sanders is now public enemy number one of the political establishment and the mainstream media, and yes, the corporate Democrats. When you take into account their actions in the midterms, the leadership who's currently in charge, and the fact that they still haven't taken responsibility for their actions in the 2016 primary, it appears that the DNC will be up to their same old dirty tricks trying to tip the scales. I'm actually going to post a separate video on the pushback that Bernie's going to receive from the establishment and the leadership of the Democratic Party throughout the primary. So right now I want to focus on this historic campaign that is now underway. For starters, let's talk about his announcement video. Fucking gold. By far the best announcement video of the primaries. The framing of the video was great. It was a mix of voiceovers from legendary speeches that Bernie Sanders has given over the last few years, as well as clips of news coverage that he's gotten on a variety of different issues. The compilation of news coverage really stood out to me because all the progressive policies that Bernie Sanders fights for go completely ignored by the media. A lot of the time when they do talk about workers' rights, living wage, climate change, Yemen, etc., it's because he's out front and in their face promoting these issues. It's almost impossible for them not to at least give him a little bit of coverage. Even better, those clips weren't just about him talking about those issues. They were the media giving him credit for real, tangible gains and achievements made on those fronts. They brought up how Bernie literally changed the national discussion on the topic of healthcare. He relentlessly advocated for single payer for years, decades. After the 2016 elections, after the DNC rigged the primary and then Donald Trump ended up winning the election, he didn't just take his ball and go home. He doubled down and he tripled down on the issue. He was flying across the country, city to city, giving town halls on Medicare for All. Talking to regular people, convincing them that it's not only feasible, it's the only logical option to address the concerns that they have over our healthcare system. He did interviews on every single network that would have him. He was doing nationally televised debates in prime time on the issue of Medicare for All. After all that, now the framing of the discussion for the majority of the country is not that this is some pie-in-the-sky pipe dream. Instead, now single payer is the inevitable next step in addressing the healthcare crisis that we have in the United States. Last check, over 70% of Americans support a Medicare for All system, and that's including Republicans and independents. The Stop Bezos Act. Bernie Sanders and Ro Khanna almost single-handedly shamed Amazon into raising the wages for over 250,000 workers to $15 an hour. That's a real achievement that made a huge difference in those workers' lives. They also had a clip of the media praising him for getting Disney to raise the minimum wage for their workers too. Another achievement that the media gave him credit for in that ad, and I would say is the most important, was last year when Bernie Sanders got the Republican majority Senate to vote to end U.S. involvement in the genocide in Yemen. For the first time ever in U.S. history, Bernie Sanders got Congress to vote to end U.S. involvement in an illegal, unauthorized war. How important that is cannot be overstated. For a very long time now, U.S. foreign policy has just been off the rails. You have George Bush and Barack Obama just willy-nilly starting illegal military interventions without the approval of Congress or the American people whenever they feel like. You got the drone wars across the Middle East and Africa, where the CIA's own report found that 90% of the time when these drones drop bombs, they hit the wrong target. Doing military interventions in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, Somalia, Yemen. Obama illegally overthrew Gaddafi in Libya, and ever since then the country has been plunged into chaos, to the point where they literally have slave trades in broad daylight in the marketplace. The executive branch has overreached way past the point of absurdity on the issue of foreign policy. And the whole time Congress has just sit back and let it happen. So for Bernie Sanders to put his foot down and say enough is enough, and back it up with a historic vote to end one of these illegal, unauthorized wars, and finally reign in executive power, is amazing, and it's something that should be talked about a lot more. I'm not even close to kidding when I say this. I don't think there's ever been a primary candidate to lay out such an extensive record of real policy gains and achievements in their announcement video. Usually in announcement videos, you get a bunch of cliches and platitudes like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker. Or absolute best case scenario, you have somebody like Tulsi Gabbard who has a policy vision that she wants to see achieved, and she'll put that in her announcement video, as she did with her anti-interventionist stance. Well, Bernie just put out a litany of major achievements, almost as if he's daring someone to say he can't get his agenda done as president, or he's just doling out hopes and dreams with no real substance or plan to get it done. Because if you're someone who follows politics, you know damn well that's the establishment's favorite smear against Bernie Sanders and his supporters. Bernie Sanders, he's just promising fairy dust to all his naive supporters, but he doesn't really have any plan to get this stuff done. He can't work with Congress. He can't work with Republicans to get his agenda passed. Now all anybody has to say is, did you see his announcement video? All those gains, all those achievements were made not only when he wasn't president, he was a member of the Senate, which was controlled by Mitch McConnell and Republicans. Well, you know I would, but the Republicans and, how am I going to get anything done? They won't let me. They got my hands tied. My hands are tied. So I guess I can't do anything. Republicans don't want to raise the minimum wage? Oh, well, guess what's the point of even trying then, right? Oh boy, did they trot that tired-ass excuse out to provide cover for Barack Obama for his inaction on basically every major issue in the country. He didn't raise the minimum wage when he was president. He didn't do anything to get us anywhere near single-payer health care. He didn't fight for free college. He didn't end the wars. Actually, he started more wars. You just go down the list of what should have been Democratic priorities while he was president. He didn't do a damn thing. And then the corporate Democrats' excuse was, well, the Republicans, man, they won't let me. They won't let me. They don't want to do it, so I guess nobody can do it then, right? The Republicans don't want to do it, so nobody can do it. So for the last 2 years, Bernie Sanders has been the perfect case study in proving that excuse is just bullshit. And you can actually get things done outside of the White House and while Congress is controlled by Republicans. He showed that if you fight for something, you can actually make gains and make progress on the issue instead of throwing your hands up and saying you can't do it before the fight even starts. Again, I think this was a great announcement video, and honestly, I can't think of a more perfect way for him to frame the launch of his campaign. And let me make this very clear. The 2019-2020 primaries, it is going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight between progressives and the corporate establishment Democrats, and this is going to be one for the history books.